Hey friends, Bill Corbin here, college minister at Commonplace Church, and hope you guys are having a great morning, surviving yet again another snow apocalypse this season. And I just want to say a couple quick things before I drop a short video here about Daniel chapter 2 and a couple things that I see here that I think are really important to understand. One is if you ever want a cup of coffee, I would be glad to buy you a cup of coffee here at Avenue Coffee Shop, 209 Belfont Avenue. And yeah, just when you come downstairs, you can say, "Hey, is Bill here?" And they can come and get me, and I'll come down and have a cup of coffee with you, and that would be awesome. I'd really enjoy that. So please take me up on that. Don't forget Mondays, 7 o'clock at the coffee shop. We have our Bible study on the book of Daniel. This is an incredible book. It is so perfect for what's going on in our world today and what's going on in your lives, the challenges you're facing, that I'm facing, and I encourage you to learn from a great man, Daniel, and how God worked in his life. Again, on Fridays at 9:30 in the morning, we have our questions conversation study. We're going to hit up a bunch of different questions that you guys have had or maybe still have about just what Christianity is all about and what God is all about. A couple of the topics that we're going to talk about that have stirred some interest is like, why does God care who I sleep with? And what is God's view of porn and pot and alcohol? And there's a whole variety of things. We want to hear questions from you as well, so look us up for that. And then this weekend, we're actually doing a retreat, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There will be time built into the retreat for studying. It's our Jubilee Conference. I encourage you to check that out as well. There will be some info about that in the comment section. So let's look at Daniel chapter 2. And to begin that, I want to talk about a guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a Christian in Germany during World War II, very opposed to the Nazi regime. He was opposed to the euthanasia programs that they were doing in Germany. He spoke out strongly against that. He spoke out strongly against what was happening to the Jews and all of that. And so he was a real mover in terms of the church's resistance of the Nazi regime. He was ultimately imprisoned for a year and a half and then hanged because he was involved in a plot to actually see Hitler assassinated, and which seems kind of strange, a Christian involved in an assassination plot. But I think we're going to see in Daniel today that there's good reason why we stand for things, even when it would cost us a great deal. And we face that every day. You face that as a college student. I face that as well. Whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, there are going to come times, or are times even now, where you are asked to stand for things or feel compelled to stand for things that could cost you a lot, whether it be relationally or academically or vocationally or like Bonhoeffer, ultimately cost you your life. And the question really is how do you know what to stand for, when to stand, when not to stand? Bonhoeffer says this, which I love this quote. He says, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." So in Daniel chapter 2, just real quickly, two things I observe. I encourage you guys to check this chapter out. There's a portion where Daniel interprets a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar has. And we're going to talk about that later on in our Bible study on Monday nights. And so I encourage you to come out for that. So I'm not going to say a lot about that, but what happens is Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has a dream. He asks his wise people, quote unquote, to come and tell him what the dream is and then the interpretation. So he doesn't tell them any specifics about the dream. He expects them to know that. They can't do it, of course, because they don't have the power of God in their lives. They're not God-fearing people. And so he says, "Hey, I'm going to kill you all." And Daniel hears about it. Daniel is actually sort of a group, part of that group, even though he's totally different than everyone involved because he's a God-fearing man. He goes to the king, okay, before he has the interpretation of the dream, before he prays about that. He goes to the king and says, "Hey, give us some more time. We'll figure this out. The king agrees, but basically says, hey, your neck is on the line. So Daniel stood up for what he believed, what he was right, even though he knew it was going to cost him and his friends their lives if he didn't do what he said he could do. And God delivers, right? He gives them the interpretation of the dream, and Daniel and his friends are elevated in status within the court of Nebuchadnezzar. And some interesting things happen because of this. But how did Daniel know, okay, to go to the king before he had the interpretation of the dream, before he talked to God about it? How did he know to go to the king and stand for what was right, the deliverance of himself, his friends, the rest of the astrologers and sorcerers and magicians they're called in the Bible? How did he know to do that? Put his neck on the line, to stand up for what was right. We see it in chapter 1, right? He stood up for what he believed in God and what God wanted. He didn't take the king's food from the table of the king, right? Well, I think it kind of comes back to a couple different things. One, it comes to what do we know about God, how he works, how he acts, how he moves according to his character. There's an important verse in the midst of this idea that God is the same today and forever. It means he never changes. He's consistent all the way through. He's never capricious. He never has a bad day. And so because of that, we can know what he wants, what he desires, how he's going to move, how he's going to act. Now that can happen in unexpected times and in various things like that, but it's still really, really consistent. There's maybe some exceptions, but not really. He's consistent. And we know this from his word, the Bible. Here's the deal. Most of the time we are going to be called to stand up for something in a workplace, like, hey, a coworker wants us to lie for them, or we're going to stand up in relationally, as a college student being tempted and tested to not live in sexual purity the way God desires, which is one of the topics we're going to talk about on Friday, by the way, coming up. And so there's lots of different things, right? So we got to know God's word, right? And then we experience, right, God's deliverance through his word, and that builds up our faith. See, that's ultimately what happens. We step up and stand up for what is right by faith. We believe. And we, like Bonhoeffer, stand up for what we believe and ultimately could lose it all with a belief of knowing that God will, in the end, through Jesus, set all things right. Hebrews chapter 11 in the New Testament talks about this. It talks about a bunch of people who believed in God, who were martyred for their faith, and who didn't see the prize in their lifetime, but then will see it in the end. Here's the other thing I see in Daniel chapter 2, and then we'll be done. Later on, Daniel asked King Nebuchadnezzar to spare the lives of the sorcerers, magicians, the sorcerers, the wisdom guys. I said sorcerers twice, sorry. And when really these guys were not necessarily good, they would have been against Daniel in many respects. But Daniel was gracious. He stood for what was true without costing other people their lives. That's not always possible. Sometimes people get thrown under the bus no matter what happens, but that's not our role as followers of Jesus. Our culture, our society is so torn at the moment because we can't figure out how to have conversations where we disagree. To disagree with one ideology in a small part, even though you may agree in that ideology in lots of other ways, means that you don't support the ideology at all. That's just not right. It's just not true. I don't think that Daniel supported the way in which the sorcerers, the magicians, and so on and so forth, philosophers, the wise guys of King Nebuchadnezzar went about what they did or what they believed. He clearly didn't. That didn't mean he needed to throw them under the bus with King Nebuchadnezzar. So let's figure out, especially as followers of Jesus, how to be gracious and truthful, loving and kind while seeking justice, and not, creating greater animosity. And I'd challenge you, if you feel like, hey, if I hold to one ideology, whether it be political or um, relational or whatever it may be, if I hold to one ideology and someone else disagrees with me in one point of that ideology, that means they must not agree with the whole thing. I want to challenge you as a follower of Jesus. That's just not true. Don't do that. All right. Well, I'll be praying for you guys this week. I pray for you guys every day. This campus, what God's doing here, His work in your lives. Again, hit me up for some coffee. If you have any questions about information, find us on Instagram, Facebook, so on and so forth. You can always check us out on the church website too, commonplacechurch.com. So have a wonderful week. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.